All right, hello and welcome. We're going to get started in a little bit. We just opened the meeting, so hopefully we'll have some more folks joining in a bit. But in the meantime, just sit tight and we'll get going in just a couple minutes. All right, All right, thanks. And as you're joining, one of the things we'll be doing is we're going to do a few things where I ask folks to put in the chat, put some questions, answer some questions in the chat. And if folks want to start off by just putting in where you're dialing in from, it'd be great to see where people are coming from. Good to see some old friends on here and new ones. See, we've got some people who've probably got a little more snow and cold outside their window than I do. So for folks who just joined, we're gonna wait another minute or two for the rest of the folks to join. And if you have just joined, please if you just put down where you're dialing in from in the chat, it would be great. Looks like we're spanning the states and we've got some folks from India here. That's fantastic. All right, well, in about one more minute, I'll get started. Um, but I think I can move on. I'm going to talk a little bit about just the logistics for this morning, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you're calling from. So the presentation itself today is going to be about 15 or 20, about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A. If you do have answers while we're going through this, please put them into chat. If it seems like something I can address right now during the meeting, just to clarify something, I'll do that then. If not, we'll probably move the more substantive questions towards the end of the presentation. We will send out an email, which will give you access to this presentation afterwards. So you'll have access to everything that we're going through today. And as we go through this today, we'll also, besides asking you where you're from, I'll probably have a few other questions to put in chat or raise hands. So hopefully we'll get some good, love to hear what folks think about some of these things we'll be talking about today as well. All right, well, I'm going to get started. Thanks everybody for joining us. Skip that. I'm Gary. I'm with Factor. I'm not going to spend much time talking about it. You can check out our website, but our primary focus is on helping organizations organize and use their data and information. And as we're all just getting started, if folks felt comfortable, just put down in the chat the type of data you're working with and or one data-related problem you are currently wrestling with. I'd love to see what folks are working with. So if you just throw that into the chat. Oh, great. New person coming in from Czechoslovakia. That's fantastic. And when I say the type of data, you're working with customer data, health data, those types of things. If anyone has anything they want to add. Great. E-commerce product data, fantastic. Banking and data. So I'm sure they've got a lot of compliance and regulatory issues there. That's one of the things we'll be talking about a little bit. Medical devices, I know there's a lot of compliance and regulatory issues there as well. All right. Sophia's working with just about everything. Great. All right. Well, I'm going to get started now. This is good. This is helpful to understand what types of things people are working with. And so the title for today's webinar is, data quality and information ethics. And we'll be talking about how those two things really overlap. I started a while ago looking at both of those things individually, and very quickly they collapsed into one problem space. And the issue of data quality uh, has been around for a long time. In Charles Babbage's biography, written in 1864, he said one of the questions multiple people asked him was if his, you know, initial computer that he was designing would still give people the right answers if they gave it the wrong data. So folks have been trying to skirt the issue of data quality since before that first computer was even built. And I think that's a real issue. And one of the things we'll be talking about today is that there are no matter how good the technology is, the data quality is still essential, especially in the age of AI. We've all heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out. I was talking to a person in charge of AI at one of the divisions at Amazon, and his comment was, "It's no longer garbage in and garbage out. It's garbage in and disaster out." Because the data is being used at such a large scale these days. And if we think about the work we're doing, at least I think the work we're doing at Factor, and my guess is the work that a lot of you folks are doing, fundamentally at the end of the day, we're trying to move information from one place to another. And there's a lot to unpack about what that means, and that's what we'll be looking at in today's webinar. The importance of this topic really came to me a while back. I was having dinner at a friend's house, and his father was there. And his father was, my friend had grown up in rural Tennessee. That's where his father was visiting from. Great guy. I forget what he did, but he was, great guy. Grew up in came from rural Tennessee, and interested in what I was doing. And we were sitting there at the table at one point together, just the two of us. And he turned to me and gave me that dreaded question. "So, what do you do?" And I was trying to figure out how to not make a lot of assumptions, but also avoid a lot of the details of what we're doing. And I just said, basically, we work with organizations to help them organize it so that they can speak with one voice so the customers get one set of information across the entire organization. Hoping that would be good enough. And he thought for a second and turned to me and said, "Oh, so if you were working with an insurance company, you'd make sure that the information on the website was the same as the information in the policy, and it was the same information that the underwriters and the adjusters were using when they were adjudicating claims." And I thought for a second, and I said, "There's a story here. Why don't you tell me more about what happened?" And he told me that, his wife had just died about 6 months ago. And during that process, his wife had to move into hospice, and he was working with the insurance company to figure out how to manage all of that. Obviously, he's in a lot of stress and duress at the time. And after his wife had passed away, he got a $12,000 bill from the insurance company for the hospice care, even though they'd approved it and told him it was all covered. And it turns out that the information that the representative he was working with was not the same information the adjuster had. The adjusters won the day, and he was on the hook for $12,000. So to me, that's a classic example of the interplay between data quality and ethics. This fundamentally impacted this person's life, impacted the decisions this person made, and as a result, he was on the hook for $12,000 that he didn't have. So that's where this stuff comes together in my mind. And I know that ethics is a really big word and can move in a lot of different directions. But today's focus is really going to be on the ethics of working with the information. With respect to data, we're not going to talk about your personal ethics. Is it ethical to work for this type of company or that type of company? I'm not even going to talk about the ethics of individual companies. Is it ethical to sell this type of product? Is it ethical to provide these type of services? Those are all essential questions, but they're not ones we're going to talk about today. It's really about what does it mean to ethically source and use your data, and to provide the transparency so people can make good, clear decisions. And so in order to do this, we need to make the distinction between data and information. And really clearly, data is, in my mind, just the bits and bytes. It's an abstraction of some notion of reality. And it's often stored digitally in bits and bytes. It might be stored as a score on a musical sheet. It might be stored in a lot of different ways. But at the end of the day, it's an abstraction. And people need context and to be able to understand what it is and then make decisions based on it. So I have here two pretty essential pieces of data from American history. But without any context, these don't mean anything. And I apologize to those of you who might not have grown up in the US educational system. You might still not have the context might still be there. It's very US centric. But if we provide just a little more context to these two white dots, all of a sudden we've got some information. These are if we look at Longfellow's poem about Paul Revere's ride, which may or may not be completely true, but the idea was that there was going to be one or two lights put up in the North Church in Boston right before the British were trying to invade Boston and the area. And by the fact that Paul Revere had the context of what these lights were going to do, he could make the decision. He knew what to do based on this information. So that's the difference in my mind between the data and the information. We need to collect the data so that we have enough context to make these decisions and have things go forward. And obviously, this can have huge impacts. And in more mundane reasons, day-to-day things, this information is a commitment or a promise. When I want to buy this plane ticket that's on here, I know, I need to know that how much it's going to cost. That's an essential piece of information for me when I'm making this decision. If I can't trust that, then I can't make the decision, or I won't go back to that place, or it might have negative impacts for me. So what does that mean for us who are managing data and information for our organizations? I like to break it down this way, using Claude Shannon's idea of information theory. You certainly don't need to understand information theory. I'm not going to go into a lot of the nuances. But what's important is that he was able to break down what it means to move information from one place to another. There has to be a source. It has to be transmitted. It's transmitted over some sort of structure, whether it's through the air, through the wire like this is, through a book. And during that transmission, there's a bit of storage that's involved. If it's in a book, it's being stored in that book. If it's in your database, it's being stored there. Even as we're talking, that information's being encoded, stored on a wire, moved to your computer, and then decoded. There needs to be someone to receive the information, a apparatus to receive the information, and then there needs to be a person on the other end. So if we think about the information, think about the supply chain and see that information quality can be impacted at each one of these stages, then we have a lot more insights on how to fix our data, how to improve our data quality going forward. All too often, we work with organizations and also we're working with organizations, and their idea of data quality is just going and fixing up a data table. Oh, these columns are empty and they should be filled. Oh, there's some bad data in here. We need to consolidate all the date formats, those types of things. All of that's important, but as we're going to see, you can have information in a database that's completely compliant to your data standards and still have really bad data. So again, when we think about this, when we collect the data, that's generally happening in forms, interviews, sensor data, all different ways of collecting it. And each one of those methodologies can introduce a bias. In fact, they always do, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can't collect everything all the time. If you're doing interviews with customers, you can only interview so many customers, and it might be that you're getting the wrong, a particular slice or perspective from them. If you've got sensor data, it's going to have, it can only sense a certain number of things. It can't sense everything that's out there. And when you have forms that people are filling out, those forms those forms are going to decide what information is important to gather from people and what isn't, and how that information should be structured. So I'm not saying we can get rid of the bias and all those things, but we have to be aware of what the collected data is, and how it can be how it can be used. Encoding is a data quality area that sometimes gets a lot of attention and sometimes gets ignored. If we think about those forms that we might be collecting data with, there might be a drop-down list where people can choose where they're from, what their favorite color is, what type of activities they're interested in. Each one of those things is a way of encoding that. When you have a drop-down list, you're encoding a certain type of information, and you're only allowing certain values there. So there might very well be values that don't make sense. I'm assuming most folks have encountered a form where they just didn't fit into any of the categories. And it gets really frustrating. It also means that the form is not collecting the right information. Storage is a big issue too, as far as the data quality goes. Do we have access to it? Is it a proprietary format? Will we have access to this 20, 40, 60 years from now? Think about records management and archives. They have to think about, for them to have quality data, that data might need to be accessible 100, 200 years from now. So all those things need to be taken into account. After we've encoded the information and stored it, there needs to be a way to decode it. So the question is, who has the tools to decode it? Is it open source? Will that be available in the future? What information is lost during the encoding and decoding process? All of those things can impact the data quality. And usage. How are we using this information? We might be using information, we might have collected completely valid information, but if we're using it in the wrong way, then again, we'll have poor data quality and people will not be able to make good decisions based on what they have. So I'm going to go into a few more details about each of these and how they impact the work we're doing. And then we'll finish up with some tools you can use within your organization to really start digging into these things. So collection is a really important one. I think it's one that's Some organizations will pay attention to it in some ways, others don't. But the important thing is, for example, here, voting data before the 19th Amendment, before the 15th Amendment, or the 19th Amendment, or the 26th Amendment could have been completely accurate. Someone went into a voting booth, put their votes down, they were counted, boom. You could have had very high quality data for the data that you had, but when you weren't including huge parts of the population, you didn't have good data. So the decisions you were making based on that data, well, based on accurate data, it wasn't based on good data. And so that's why understanding the collection process is really important. In a more applicable situation for us, it might be there's been some customer survey data based on folks who are using a particular product. And it turns out that people were not happy with a particular workflow or a particular part of the product. And that's great. I mean, that's good that you've got that, but that doesn't mean that data is going to be applicable to your other products or other audiences that might be using that same product. So again, it's important as you go through the data collection process, it's really important to understand what you have and how it can be used. Other things to take into account for the collection process is when it was collected. Was this data collected within the past year or was it collected 5 years ago? Does that mean, and in some cases that 5-year-old data might be really relevant. In other cases, it might not, and it shouldn't be used. So all of these things need to go into account for understanding collection. And I think hopefully you're going to see that this all of a sudden getting this data quality into place is more than just making sure that you've got all your required fields filled out. It's a process, it's a way of thinking about things that's more holistic. So encoding and decoding, I think, are really important. They're essential. There's no way to move data from one place to another without encoding it and decoding it. Even if you and I were talking face to face, I've got an idea in my head. It's going to get encoded into, well, if it's just me, English, because I can only speak one language. It's then going to get encoded through physically as it comes out of my mouth instead of vibrations in the air. It's going to move across the air, and then you're going to hear it, decode it, and then bring your perspective to it. And so obviously, that notion of encoding and decoding happens in every transaction. And so we need to understand what type of technology and processes are required to make this happen. What type of encryption process is going through, and is it lossless? And even when we say lossless, what do we mean? What parts of it are being lost? Transparency is a huge part of this process. Who can access the encryption and decryption processes? Can the process be interrogated? Especially now with so much going on with the black box of AI, there's a lot of work that just fundamentally can't be interrogated. We can't understand how we got from here to there. Which again, in some cases might be fine, but if you're creating financial reports that your CFO needs to sign off on, they're going to want to make sure there's complete transparency in that process. And then there's the notion of fidelity. What gets lost in the process? If you look at the image we've got right here, this is a statue in Philadelphia. If you're ever there, I recommend it. It's a pretty stunning statue. I took that same image and converted it to an 8-bit image that could be used as a thumbnail. Perfectly valid usage for this to be a thumbnail, but so much got lost in that encoding and decoding process that it wouldn't be useful for other purposes. So again, we need to think about what gets lost in the encoding and decoding process. And is it applicable for the decision to help people make the decisions they need to make? Storage is a great scenario too. The question is, are we storing this in a format that can get used in the future? Where is it being stored? Is it physically secure? Is it secure against government oversight? Is it in a, what are the laws that are applicable to it at that time? Will the storage format be available, 100 years from now? Will it degrade gracefully? All those things. It's just the type of thing that we want to, have available to us 100 years from now. Thing I always think about is that if 200 years from now, someone unearthed a CD and a vinyl album, there's a much greater chance that they'll be able to get the information off that vinyl album than they will the CD, because the way that data has been encrypted is a lot more straightforward. It can't capture as much information, but it will have the information, but it will be the information that's there will be far more accessible. And so for usage, really we're thinking about, is this appropriate for the audience? Can it be delivered in a timely manner? Who gets access to it? We may have collected a ton of great information. We might have it be available, but if it's in English and our target, the folks who need to use it, primarily speak Italian or French or Spanish, that's not going to be all that useful to them. Or maybe we collected a lot of great medical information from doctors. But we want to make this information available to people caring for relatives who are sick, friends or relatives that are sick. They need completely different frame on that information. So is the language in terms of the actual language itself, the level of detail or education assumptions built into that are all, is that the way it's being stored and being collected, is it applicable for the audience that's going to use it? When is it available? Is it available in archives that's only open during business hours? That's going to make it impossible for someone who's working a 9-to-5 job to get access to it. Or does it assume, a particular type of computer with a particular type of browser that not everybody will have? And is it available in the appropriate formats? Again, some people might want to be able to see things on paper. Other folks want them electronically. All those types of things need to be understood as we're thinking about the data quality so that people can make decisions based on this information. So for example, in this case of this flight information, this flight information was extremely useful for finding a ticket to purchase, but it's not useful if I'm trying to figure out for tracking historical pricing. I have no idea if this is a high or low price, but I do know that this is the price for this ticket. So again, this serves a particular purpose, but it doesn't serve all purposes. Yeah. Tony, that's a great point. Tony has a great point in the chat. I'd love to come back to that towards the end, but you're right. I mean, that's a great example with sensor data. There's all that decoding controller, and I like the way, where he says that most data journeys need careful scrutiny via lossless and security concerns. Yeah, I think that idea of thinking about the data journey and careful scrutiny is exactly what we're trying to get at right here. And sensor data is a great example because it's spanning, it's going from many different modalities and analog to digital, storage, compression, all those things. So that's thanks for bringing that up. Now, I haven't mentioned AI a whole lot, but it's really at the back, all of this stuff. I started writing this before, the LLMs came on the scene in 2020, 2021. But everything we're talking about right here is even more valuable when we think about using your data for AI. So AI is just going to use it. It's going to use it faster. It's going to use it at a much larger scale. a lot less room for human interpretation in the process. And if we think about it, every time well, whether we're using AI or other things, we're making promises to people. We're making promises that say, if you read this and this is something that you can use to make a decision, whether to buy a ticket, whether to figure out what type of healthcare to use, what types of socks to purchase, all of those things. So one way to think about this is we're in the, people are going to make a decision based on what we have. We're making promises to people. And to me, it all comes down to we don't want to make promises we can't keep. And that's really where the ethics of this comes into play. People are going to people need to make decisions. They make decisions based on information. There's nothing else to make a decision based on. And it's our job to provide that information to people, we're making a promise to them. And I think it's our job working with our organizations, our business partners and stuff like that to really make sure we're doing right by the information and the data. So that's been a lot of talking. You might realistically be asking yourself why or what do we do next? And I think there's a couple very tangible things that folks can do. Certainly we're doing it with our customers. And to get right to Tony's comment, first thing you can do is look at your data lifecycle in the context of these different stages. And I'll give you a tool for that in a moment. And determine the data quality impact of each of those stages. Give each stage its own individual level of scrutiny. Too often people say, oh, we've got a data problem. Let's hire some interns to go and clean up the data in this database because it's just not right. Which is fine, that needs to be done, but that's only addressing a very small part of this notion of data quality. On day one, there's probably plenty of things you can fix. There's stuff in that database. Maybe you've got some outdated forms that you're using to collect information, and you need to update some of the drop-down lists or some of the questions. Those are the types of things you can do today. You can probably fix the interfaces, the usability of the interfaces that people have to use the information, or to import it. And we can also provide transparency on this on day one. You can do a quick assessment of these things and provide a scorecard to your organization. Said, hey, this is what we've got. If we're going to provide this to our customers, and just as importantly, if we're going to provide this data to our AI tools, this is where our gaps are, and as a result, these are where our risks are. So these are things I believe you can do right now, and all of these things will lead to deeper questions going forward. And I'll just end with this. We find this to be a really simple but really valuable tool that you can use. Just next time you're in a meeting, you can just put this in a Miro board, put it up on a whiteboard, get a bunch of sticky notes or whatnot, and just start looking at each of these different phases and ask yourself, what are the impacts to people on this information? How do we, what is included and what's not included in this? What's lost in each of these phases? How important is the timeliness of this? If you can go through those and you'll ask your own questions as well. But that simple exercise, it doesn't need to take more than 20 or 30 minutes with a group of folks, can yield enormous results in terms of the quality of your data and what you need to do with it right away. And again, like I said, there's probably plenty of things that could be done right away, certainly things you could report on, and then, open the door for the deeper work that will need to be done as you go through this journey. So that's what we've got. I'd love to open it up to questions, comments that people have. Love to hear what type of data issues or decisions people are making based on your data. But any comments or thoughts would be great right now. We can open it up to questions. And Troy, did you have any other comments based on what we said and how it applies to your work? Do folks have any questions about where they might start with this, or any comments about, places where they see in their organizations how these different, breaking it down to these 5 different stages might be useful? All right. Well, if we don't have any questions, we'll send out a follow-up email. It'll have included a link to this deck. Anyone who does have any follow-up questions, the email will include a Calendly link. We're more than welcome to set up a 30-minute consult. Love to answer any questions you have. It won't be a sales call. It's really just if you've got any questions about what's going on here or want to understand better how it applies to your organization. Um, I'd love to jump on a call with you. Okay, Troy. Yeah, Troy says it's very challenging to obtain what each component designer has used to verify the integrity. That's a huge one we see with sensor data, is often that sensor data is put in, one person puts it in a particular location and they understand what it is, but it doesn't fit in the larger context of the organization itself. Um, all right. Great. We'll get that email out. Again, please, please reach out. Please use that 30-minute link. We'd love to chat and hear how this applies to you. This is a process we're still developing. We certainly don't have everything figured out. I'd love to hear how you think this could apply to your situation. All right. With that, we will close it up. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. I really appreciate it.